And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome aboard. I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your marine weather outlook. Starting with the satellite imagery on this Wednesday afternoon, July 19th. We have a weakening area of low pressure pushing south of the Gulf. We have a band of moisture that is pushed into the Kenai Peninsula, producing areas of mainly light rain. And still some scattered showers lingering across portions of the Panhandle and northern Gulf Coast. Frontal system has pushed its way toward the west and southwestern coast and kind of weakened to troughs. Have still some pretty good flow out over the western half of the Aleutians and a pretty good push of warmer air that has come up through the Bering Sea. Overall, we are anticipating that on the weather maps, the front will wash out to just a trough that just kind of brings in some moisture, mainly to areas of the southwest and even into western portions of the west central interior. As we go further inland, scattered showers and thunderstorms will be possible Thursday, and then along the Gulf Coast, weak high pressure takes over, and that is going to provide much lighter winds, though there could be some marine layers as a result of not much in the way of any wind motion there, perhaps maybe even a little fog in some spots. Otherwise, Friday, high pressure will continue to dominate here, the mainland, and starting to warm up. A ridge of high pressure mid-levels of the atmosphere will really allow temperatures to recover in the 80s to 90 degrees over the weekend here, especially by Sunday. But weak features, the Gulf, relatively light winds. Next system, though, coming through the lower Bering Sea north of the central Aleutians, have a little breezier conditions as it works its way through the eastern Aleutians and tip of the Alaska Peninsula. Ice just continues to slowly melt up in the far north, up through the Beaufort Sea. Chukchi Sea is largely open, and as we look at the southeast panhandle, winds will generally be out of the northwest around 10 knots on Thursday, with waves running a couple of feet. Outer coast winds generally northwest around 10 knots as well, with waves of 2 to 3 feet. On Friday, winds will become southeasterly around 10 knots, inner channels, including Stevens Passage, Lynn Canal, with waves only a couple of feet. Outer coast winds southeasterly 10 to 15 knots. Until you get north of Gustavus to outside of Yakutat Bay, winds will be a bit variable there at 10 knots and waves generally 3 feet. Variable winds where we have this weak high pressure ridge on Thursday. Variable winds around 10 knots common throughout the northwestern Gulf, with waves only running 2-3 feet. Westerly wind there, 10 knots within the broader open waters of Prince William Sound. And then look for south winds 10 knots through Middle and Upper Cook Inlet, with waves running only a couple of feet. For Kodiak Island on Thursday, variable winds around 10 knots, waves generally a couple of feet there. Those winds will turn back more toward the southwest, especially on the Bering side of the Alaska Peninsula, with waves there 4 to 5 feet. And on Friday, variable winds around 10 knots will continue in the vicinity of Kodiak Island, with waves just a couple of feet or so. But look for winds to try to go east and then southerly and increasing to 20 knots, especially along the Bering side of the Alaska Peninsula, with waves 3-4 feet on the North Pacific side and 4 to 6 feet on the Bering side. Winds across the Aleutian chain on Thursday will be west to southwest eastern Aleutians, 20 to 25 knots. Southwesterly, though, across the central Aleutians, and as much as 25 to near 30 knots, especially west of Adak and southeast of Kiska. Waves generally in the populated area, the eastern Aleutians, if you can call it that, 3-4 feet to maybe as high as 9 feet there to the west and southwest of Adak. And then winds across much of the, say, eastern and central Aleutians on Friday will be southwesterly around 20 to 25 knots, waves running 6 to as high as 9 feet there west of Adak, and generally in the 5 to 6 foot range from Dutch Harbor westward to Adak. And then along the southwest coast, southwest winds 15 to 20 knots into Bristol and Kuskokwim Bays. Southwest winds 15 knots off of the Yukon Delta, turning southerly 15 knots within Norton Sound, and winds as high as 20 to 25 knots out towards St. Matthew, St. Paul, with waves there running 8 feet. And for Friday, winds will be southeast 20 knots in Bristol Bay, southerly up to 25 knots, 3-4 foot waves there into Kuskokwim Bay. And look for southwest to south winds at 10 knots off of Hooper Bay and the lower Yukon Delta and surrounding there into Norton Sound, with waves running 2 to 3 feet. And as we go up north of St. Lawrence Island, look for southeast winds 15 to 20 knots near Nome and they're west of Port Clarence. More easterly winds in the Chukchi Sea, 15 to 20 knots. Falling off to easterly winds, 15 knots there along the Arctic coast, and waves generally where there is any open water running just a few feet. And then on Friday, winds will be out of the east, trying to turn a little more southeast to south off of the north slope, 10 to 15 knots on Friday. And then down through the Chukchi Sea, winds will generally be southeast to south, 15 knots, and that south winds will continue south of the Bering Strait with waves where there is open water, generally running just 2 to 3 feet.